Well, welcome, Edward. Thank you very much for joining me today. I know we connected through LinkedIn, and I'm really excited to hear more about your career journey through all the different industries you have been in, as well as your thoughts on data philosophy today.
Sure. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Of course. Yeah. So I guess to start, I know you have led teams at Fortune 500s as well as startups across a variety of different industries, from retail to supply chain, logistics to financial services. And now you are at Olo. So I would love to hear about what excites you on Olo's mission to enable hospitality for the digital age.
Sure. Well, Olio reached out to me last summer, and they were looking for somebody to build out their analytics capabilities. It's a small company, about 400 people. They've been in business for 15 years, and they work at helping many of the restaurant chains, about half of them in the U.S., to integrate all of their delivery and optimizing services around like curbside pickup, working with companies like DoorDash. So it's something that when they reached out to me and I started looking at it, I could really see the benefits of how it will help a lot of companies and just a lot of people to stay in business.
Mhm.
So from that aspect, it was something I could resonate with. The other, from more of a personal development, it's really one of those industries that had last year really started to accelerate massively. And with that type of acceleration often comes a lot of change, and a lot of new ideas need to be looked at. And that's always been appealing to me, to work in those kind of environments. So those were the two big reasons why I joined Olo. And it's I started in November, so I've only been there a few months, but it's been an organization that I have to say it's probably one of the more enjoyable workplaces I've been in so far. And when they say they focus on people, yeah, I worked in a lot of companies that say that too, but they actually do, they actually have been delivering on that one. So I'm very happy with the experience.
That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, I think especially with COVID and the working from home trend, obviously there's, I imagine both restaurants with delivery and takeout, as well as other groceries and just really all kind of retail and hospitality have been greatly impacted. So I imagine from the data perspective, it must be really interesting as we have these traditionally offline businesses that may have data localized, right? In point of sale systems or just even paper and taking orders of napkins. Changing from that to more of a digitized system. So I'm curious to hear what are some of the maybe surprises or challenges you have seen even within your short time at Olo.
Well, for me, it's very similar to when I started in retail. So they were going through their digital transformation over a decade too. When I got into it, I see a lot of that as well with restaurants. A lot of them are run by people that focus very heavily on the operations side of things for obvious reasons, trying to make sure that the food quality is as good as it can be, and making sure that they're forecasting how much food they need. But just like in retail, that means having to look outside your four walls a lot more than they might have been used to in the past. And that's something that I'm trying to bring to the different restaurants that we partner with, is just helping them see that picture, that they do want to see it. They just hadn't had the tools to do that in the past. And that's really an acceleration due to everything that happened last year. Obviously, the way things were is a little different. And now you have people that in the past, like senior citizens who maybe not, who would not have used a delivery service. Now all of a sudden they are in some markets one of the bigger demographics using such a service. That brings into the mix very different types of models that you might want to have. Or now you have families, so a lot of restaurants have adopted family style menus for their ordering. And that makes the analytics a little more interesting to do, because in the past it was much more individual orders. And it's a little fun when you start looking at calorie count, where all of a sudden it just spikes up and you're like,
Well,
are people eating 4 times more, or is this something else? It's like, oh, it's okay. It's family size meals. So now you have to look at the average calorie count a little differently because the restaurants have adopted to these different needs that the consumers are saying they want.
to your point, as the unit changes, as well as restaurants move to adapting to kind of the new future, whether that be catering to older parents or catering to larger family sizes, even combined family sizes, right? I know a lot of folks, I'm based in San Francisco, so I know a lot of young professionals have chosen to move back home and moving with the family. So I'm sure their consumption habits and purchasing habits have changed as well. Working at the intersection of data, experience science, and customer experience. I'd love to start diving in and hearing more about data philosophy. What is data philosophy and why is this important to you?
Well, it's something that took years to get to that phase. I started out my career as a market analyst, focused on European markets, and it was fairly straightforward stuff, your typical BI type of analytics. Then, as I started getting into more the e-commerce space, when I went to Best Buy, I was actually hired to build out personalization.
Mm,
And I really, the data we were getting at Best Buy through qualitative research basically said you could put Bob's Electronics on the outside of a Best Buy. Most people didn't care. They were there to get the product and the experience they were looking for. So I always said, nobody buys an Xbox just to have an Xbox. It's not sitting in their living room saying, "Look, I've got an Xbox." There's the mom who's on a snow day thinking of keeping the kids contained so they're not tearing the house apart. That's an experience. The 20-something-year-old thinking of playing against their friends on some online game. That's an experience. That's what people are really buying. So that really took us in a different direction. Instead of just doing your typical machine learning algorithms that everyone else was doing, it was, let's start developing personas and really start mapping that journey around the persona. And it really took us much further along than some of our counterparts were doing. But at the same time, we were still thinking very much in that data science mindset, which really limited us in terms of how we were looking at the picture, because we were seeing things in the data. When you're at a place like a Best Buy, Walmart, your data volume is so big, you actually get to see the degradation or the stabilization at a much faster rate than you would at much smaller companies.
mm,
So we were seeing the weaknesses pretty early on. Within 6 months, you'd see degradation starting to kick in, and it's like, okay, but what's really happening here? And you could throw all the technology and math problems at it, and you'd find it's still not really solving the problem. All we're doing is just delaying the inevitable. And the answer was, well, let's just make more algorithms then. Like, yeah, you can only do that for so long. And then I started to see the failure rate in data science, because then I wanted to figure out why was this happening. And I started looking at other companies, other industries, and I could see the failure rate was, well into the 80 percentile range for most data science teams. And I was like, that's not good. And it should not be that way, because everyone's saying sexiest job in the world. This is the
that sounds
future.
Yep.
You've got CEOs saying, oh, we're getting a data science team. They're going to determine everything for us. It's like, yeah, not with an 80+% failure rate. That's not going to happen.
Yep.
So what was that missing piece? Then I went off to Target, where they actually have a team with linguists, sociologists, psychologists, and started integrating some of those skill sets into what we were working on, and really started to see that whole human aspect really play out. And again, started integrating it, but you're trying to merge two different worlds together. And it's like, yeah, behavioral science, everyone's like, sure, we need that, but what's the common glue that holds it all together? So now all of a sudden you've got two very academic fields, data science, behavioral science, in the mix, but not really talking a common language. And then I was just starting to, I always had this thing for philosophy and anime, and I actually was giving a presentation locally where I was just talking about, I liked philosophy when I was an undergrad, almost got a minor in it.
Yeah.
And so I started using philosophy concepts to explain some data concepts. And somebody was like,
Mm.
there should be like a class on this at the university so we can learn philosophy related to data. And I was like, well, somebody's probably done this already.
Mm.
Went online, looked for a book. There wasn't one. Looked for blogs. Yeah, I think I found like two, but not really at the level I was looking for.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, there really isn't anything out there. So then I was just like, well, how do we start pulling these concepts in and how do I start using them? As I started working with other companies, I started to realize that was actually kind of the glue that pulled everybody together. You could start looking at things like the Diderot effect, and that explains why people go to IKEA and walk out with a bunch of things that they didn't have any plan on doing. Or, uh, like I'm hiring right now, and I talk about I'm looking to build a team with expert intuition.
Mm.
That again is a philosophical concept where you get to the point where you're so good at your field, you just kind of intuitively know what the next thing's going to happen. That's what I'm looking for on a team. Or we start looking at things like the network effect from a social perspective.
Mhm.
That explains how, this is, I actually was just getting off a conversation with one of my analysts explaining this, saying nobody actually lives in a bubble. Even now during lockdown, where there's a social network that influences our decision making process. Those are the things we need to look at in terms of understanding why somebody makes a purchasing decision. Why did somebody go to Chipotle versus Qdoba? There's an influence there beyond just their own personal decision making that makes that happen.
Mhm.
For some people, it's there was a group vote and that was the decision. Okay, now we know what that network effect is. There's also just things like atemporality, which explains there's a decoupling from the past, which we can kind of say is happening right now, and you haven't actually defined what that new normal is going forward. You're in this temporal time period called atemporality. So these are concepts that come out of philosophy that help to kind of just explain things to really a larger audience, because I can actually go and talk to finance, talk to leadership, talk to marketing. When you start using these terms, it really demystifies some of the data science work.
Mhm.
Instead of sitting there talking about decision trees, linear regression, or matrix factorization, where they're just like, I got no idea what the hell you just said. Now all of a sudden you're using terms which some of them probably were exposed to when they were in college, doing their liberal arts degree or what have you.
Mm.
Then it really boils things down into a language that allows everybody to feel like they're a part of the equation. But it also explains a lot of what's happening in there. So Olo and restaurants, yeah, I can say it's an atemporal time period. And you can say this for a lot of industries like retail too. A lot of the algorithms rely on historical data.
Mhm.
Yeah, anything 2019 and before that, I wouldn't place too much bet on using that to train an algorithm right now in terms of consumer behavioral patterns.
Right, because it's almost like an earthquake, and effectively there's been a fault line, and that's been driven, right? So again, to your point, the past is only relevant if all other conditions are relatively consistent and held stable. But kind of as we enter into this a temporal phase where a lot has changed, both externally, societally, even the family bubble of what we consider as social pod and family structure, right? As all the external factors have changed, past data will no longer be a reliable index or even predictor of future insights. And I love that. I think what I'm hearing is really data science is beyond just the math and the sciences, but bring in the behavioral science aspect and how interdisciplinary it is, and the fact that you can data science as a field can benefit from a lot of behavioral science, right? I'm hearing psychology, I'm hearing economics, I'm hearing a lot more of the social sciences that embedded within it to form what you mentioned, that intuition, where someone with the deep expertise in data science, where they are very comfortable with the tools, right? With the data science, the algorithm, the matrix, and in linear regression, and all these tools and tactics, but they're able to almost abstract at a higher level and start seeing patterns across other commonalities and speak that language whether that be executives or to their team members, other teammates, and actually share those knowledge across without a very sterile kind of math and science terminology around it that might throw people off who haven't been exposed to it as much. Go
For
ahead.
me, I really look at, and I benefited quite well off of data science, but I really just see it as one more rung on the step of getting to understanding analytics and really moving towards that phase of true discovery. And that to me is really the center of what it is we're trying to do in analytics. It's working around discovering. We're solving problems, discovering new things, or discovering things that were not apparent to us before. And the philosophy allows us to start thinking. And that's the other thing is, there's authors like Nicholas Carr who talks about the shallows, how the internet kind of prevents us from doing deep thinking. And I've noticed that too, where people just get frustrated. It's like, well, I'll just go online and search for it. It's like, yeah, but you can't always just translate from someone else's experience to your own. And I find that the philosophy aspect of it also helps people to think a bit more and really get more into that deep thought. And that's a skill set I actually think is quite important. And I actually do try to figure out from people how good are they at thinking deeply when it comes to problem solving. I do think that's one of the negatives of the internet. It really has caused us to think very shallow in a lot of ways, not really solving and getting to the bedrock of the problem. But by reintroducing philosophy to it, I think it does help. Plus, and I've had some objections from data scientists who are like, philosophy is wishy-washy. It's like, well, actually, they're usually considered one of the top 3 in terms of IQ for people that graduate with a degree. So it's not a light subject by any measure.
Oh yeah. The fact that once in a while people still reference quotes from great philosophers, right? The fact that it's still highly regarded as one of the earliest, I would say the earliest expert who are able to denote astronomy without having that scientific background, who are able to understand physics and as just all other aspects of the field, just through, I think, the nature of thinking, right? And to your point, through asking questions and diving deeper. I think one of the side effects of internet is everyone has very short attention span and that constant context switching, because even the nature of going through a Google search and being distracted by some of the results that's served up that lead you down multiple rabbit holes. And by the end of it, even just a 5-minute Google session, you may emerge completely unaware of what was the initial question you started with, because all these other somewhat relevant or irrelevant results were served that distracted you from that initial probing and investigative questioning.
Yeah, and it's the same with social media. This is why, like, if you go to like my Twitter feed, there's really nothing there. Facebook, I really don't. I go on there to like kind of see current event stuff, but I don't necessarily get into conversations because they quickly devolve into something else.
Definitely. And it's important to guard our attention span, especially in these days and times when
Yeah,
everyone's fighting
yeah,
for that attention.
you go to Twitter and Facebook and you start scrolling, and it's just like, cat video, politics, somebody posting their lunch, and it's, are you really focusing on anything, or is it just that quick hit of just getting your attention onto something else? So yeah, if you're really trying to do problem solving, those are like the 2 worst places to go.
So, yep, definitely. I totally agree. Related to that, something I would like to dive into and something I'm curious about. As you mentioned, we're entering this a temporal time frame. And given that some of the past data, which a lot of teams have relied upon, especially just with all of the data that's been there for past 5 years, past 10 years, may no longer be relevant. So what are some of the ways you're thinking of addressing that, right? Because I think a lot of the value of data sciences and algorithms and even machine learning and AI is it depends on a large data set. And kind of the deeper that stack go, the more history you have, hopefully the more accurate your prediction of the future may be. But if we're effectively saying, hey, here's a fresh start, and it starts on March 19th, 2020, which is not, at all comparable to several years of data. What are some of the ways you go about solving data challenges with limited set of data?
Well, that's where another concept comes into play, which is heterotopias. And that's really having an environment that allows for many ways of thought and thinking to exist. And it's also something I bring into my hiring philosophy as well, which is I always tell recruiting, I'm looking for diversity of thought. If everybody on my team looks like we went to the same high school, we made a problem. We made an error in our hiring. Uh, I do want those people with different backgrounds and different ways of thinking, because that's how we're able to solve things. So with like the current situation, it's like, well, there are areas in history that have had similar types of scenarios happen. How can we learn from those? Well, having somebody on the team that's actually got like an anthropology background, they come in quite handy at helping us to go back and look at similar events. Yeah,
Mm,
we're not going to have the digital data available to us, but we will have the hindsight available to us to, well, how did people really react to that past event?
mhm.
What can we learn from that as well? There's just that, like the whole toilet paper craze last spring was actually very, it was something that you would have expected to see actually,
Mhm.
uh, which is why I got mine back in February of last year.
You stocked up. That's great.
Yeah, and I knew it was coming, so actually over the period of time, I didn't really go in and buy like some massive thing. It was just like, okay, maybe I'll just buy one more of
Mm,
that,
mhm.
and it's just as when people's norm is being disrupted, everyone will get to the conclusion of understanding my normal is gone. And when they get to that conclusion, they actually swing the pendulum to one side or the other quite radically. And that's why you saw the toilet paper craze. It just was a normal, natural response to how people would act. But once they started settling down, and this is why we don't see that happening now. They realize, hey, I survived that. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Fight
Now
or
I
flight kicked in. Yeah.
it's just going back and understanding, yeah, those past events, and then how do we really adapt to that? But it's really much more around trying to anticipate what's happening in the future. And I don't look at data like some of my counterparts, where they like to say, well, just look at the data. You might hear my toddlers crying right now.
It's that time. Yep.
Yeah, nap time, but he doesn't like it.
Oh, how old is your toddler?
2.5.
Oh, it's very cute. I think is it at the age where he is now able to sleep through the night, but it's getting very like choosy.
Yeah, he sleeps through the night quite well, but
And please let me know, obviously, if you have to jump off the call, that's totally fine. No worries at all.
so where was I?
We're talking about toilet paper and we're talking about fight or flight. And as you mentioned, people swing to one end of the pendulum, and once they settle in, they get back on track. And now we're kind of back to more of a new normal.
Yeah, well, where I was going with that is that, yeah, I think it's very important that, at least in analytics, to me, you're sort of the modern day psychic in some ways. And really that's what I find company executives are always looking for, is predict the future.
Yep.
And I found that that's probably the best skill set to cultivate. And I often hear, and it makes me cringe whenever I hear this, when somebody says, well, just listen to the data, trust the data. I'm like, data doesn't speak. It's
Yeah.
actually always interpreted. I said, show me the actual data. And they might point to a PowerPoint, or they might point to some code, and I'm like, that's interpreted,
Yep.
that's abstract. So I said, how I actually take data and turn it into information will really influence how it's received by the audience. And so that art of understanding how to actually craft it into something usable is very, very much a skill set that I think few really pay attention to. And that's really trying to understand, well, what's really the objective of using this data? Where are we trying to go with this? So that,
Yeah,
I think, is a skill set that is very much missed out on.
100% agree with what you're saying, which is context is really important, the emotions behind it, and even going further, being able to look at a set of raw data, as you mentioned, which can literally be looking at a database, running a SQL query, or looking at rows and columns on an Excel spreadsheet. But to able to look at that and beginning to form some of those hypotheses, and then following that thread and start asking deeper and probing questions to see, oh, where will this go? Am I surprised by this correlation versus causation? And really going down that singular rabbit hole, however it may be, and to emerge with saying, all right, I think here are some observed insights and how this is relevant in our business context, specifically in the business related questions that we're asking. To your point, that in itself has it's a multi-dimensional skill, right? Where there's storytelling, there's problem solving, there's critical thinking, just a lot of skills that layer on top of give me the raw data and we will trust it. And whatever the data says is whatever we'll do.
Yeah, you don't want to, I was having this conversation last week. We were talking about A/B testing, and why a product team should not do their own A/B testing. Is that, look, if you can't separate yourself from the outcome, which most of us can't, then you really should have a separate team doing it, because you're always just going to keep running the test until you get the result you want. Product manager laughed and said, yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do. And I said, yeah.
Massaging the data, you say.
And hey, it's human nature. You're building a product, you're very proud of it. And you believe you're building the best. You don't want to have something come back and it says, now this new concept you want to build into it doesn't work. You're going to try and find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
That's what most of us will do. And I was like, yeah, we just got to acknowledge human nature and the process, and the idea of trust the data. There was, another test where it came back inconclusive. And I said, it's inconclusive because you didn't control for the variables. You only control for the ones that you directly control, but not other people in the supply chain control. So yeah, it's inconclusive because you didn't build the rigors in it well enough.
I think one of the quote I saw from one of your past posts really resonated as well, which is data is useful and good to have, but data alone won't solve your problems, right? Which is exactly what we're talking about here.
It goes back to the whole thing where I was actually doing a presentation years ago on innovation and innovation teams. And I said that at least here in America, maybe for the world, I don't know. We tend to have this idea that because it's new, it must be better. I said that's not true when you really look at it. At the time, I said most of our cell phones actually have worse reception than a landline phone that's been around for 100 years. We need to get out of that mindset that new actually means better, and we should always question, is this really better than what we have? And that kind of thinking I kind of drilled into some of the product managers at Best Buy, because the tech stack that I built back in 2011, they still pretty much use it. Why? Because it works. It's got very low, cost on it. So, and, it does the job. Now, I would have improved it by now, but if you're just trying to make money and get your yearly bonus, it works.
When you're putting a good foundation, right? Even if it may be slightly outdated, obviously could do with some new and new improvements and upgrades, but fundamentally the foundation is sound, right? So therefore it's stable, and keeping the lights on, business as usual. You want stability. You don't want constant changes. And I think that's an interesting aspect around product manager and internal operation, is that I think a lot of the time the shiny object syndrome is a trap that most fall into, especially in tech, where it is exciting talking about new technology. It is exciting talking about new tools and new tech stack. But at the same time, in an enterprise B2B use case, no one wants their workflow, constantly being disrupted and constantly saying, hey, learn new tools, hey, learn new workflow. And while you're doing it, figure out all the downstream impact you're going to have because you're not working a silo, right? You're collaborating with other people. So I think that's a really, really good point around balancing between new stuff as well as stability.
Yeah, and it really resonated for me when I was at Target. My first time I had to go talk to one of the SVPs, one of the big wigs there. My boss walks in. He was very much into talking tech is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so we walk in, and we're just told, you guys got 15 minutes. So right away, he's like, we're using Scala for this. We're using R, and you just see them sitting there just like smiling, looking at their watches. And I'm like, so what this means is we're going to be raising conversion rates by X percentage over this amount of time period. And, started getting into the actual dollars and cents of things. And how's it going to impact the typical customer journey that for your target customer? All of a sudden it was like, hey, hold on, let's get a couple other people in here. So that 15 minutes turned into an hour-long conversation.
Mm.
And it was, really struck me because then, my boss, although it never really kind of dawned on him why we were there for an hour instead of 15 minutes, because he still kept talking tech. But it was know your audience and really speak their language. And I see this constantly today where, data scientists or data engineers, they want to be seen as like the smartest person in the room.
Mm.
I, when, like I said, right now I'm hiring, and I said, look, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I've done something wrong in hiring. I want my team members to challenge me. I want them to feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I think you're wrong in your thought process here, and here's why. And come up with good, valid arguments. That to me is a healthy environment. And that means not focusing on the technology per se. The understanding the customer experience, the why they do what they do is so much more important and so much more harder to understand than the tech. I always say the tech's the easy part when you really think about it.
Yeah.
Why is someone buying a laptop in August? This was actually an interview question I had at Best Buy, because there's no right answer. And it was actually a really important question to get an answer to. Because in August, you have back to school sales. Some states you have tax-free holidays. So are they buying a laptop for themselves to go to school, for someone in their family? Or are they just understanding that they can get a good deal and they just waited to get one? It's not even related to going back to school.
Yeah.
How you engage each one of those demographics is going to be very different. How do you understand, somebody's life events and how it affects them? One of the things is like looking at, like right now, restaurant brand portfolios. I don't go to Taco Bell all that much anymore. Yeah, when I was in my 20s, definitely. But if I saw somebody in their 60s and above trying to walk into one, I'd be like, what are you doing? You know what that's going to do to you? It's just there's each brand has sort of a certain life cycle to them based off of demographics, location, and what made me change. Well, have kids, and it's like, yeah, I probably shouldn't be eating this, and I don't want them to really eating this either. I know eventually they will, but we'll just delay that as long as we can.
We'll go down that road when we come to it.
Yeah, and that's really how people make decisions. And if you just look at it from a pure data perspective, you're going to miss all that. And if you just look at it from a pure behavioral science perspective, yes, you can identify it, but then how do you really explain this to everybody else in the company? How do you explain this to sales and marketing in a way that they can understand? That's really where the philosophy comes into play. I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised. It's actually quite a common language across many disciplines. So it's easy for people to grasp a lot of these concepts. So like when I say, hey, I'm trying to build like a heterotopia analytics environment, and people are like, what the hell did you just say? And I was like, well, basically what I'm trying to do is build an environment where somebody who knows R or somebody who knows Python or Scala, they all have an environment in order to build their proof of concepts in, and then we can test those out. But if I just had the standard production stack and we just mirrored it over, that person who knows R but doesn't really know Python all that well, they're not going to be at their best. And really, how hard is it to spin up a virtual environment these days? I mean, it's like, you can have it up in a couple minutes. So why not invest in that? The gain you get out of it is so much better. And I can show that it's like, look, we can prove products at X percentage faster than we could if we just standardize on one stack.
Mhm.
And that's going to save us money in the long run. And sure, if I got to take that R code and port it over to Python, I just get a developer to do it. It's not that difficult.
It actually opens up more doors and it allows you to tap into a greater, more diverse, hopefully candidate source as well, versus having a very prescribed format. And in which case, by nature, you're going to exclude some, right? And you won't have
Yeah,
access to its wide a
yeah,
diverse.
and that's the benefit. Like, we just put out a job yesterday.
Mhm.
And Olo's not a big company, and let's face it, most people don't know who Olo is. My aunt, when I told her where I'm working, she's like, "Never heard of this restaurant before." I'm like, "It's not a restaurant."
Yeah.
And this morning when I logged in, we've already got 200 candidates, which
Wow.
for me it's very exciting. Because I've worked at big companies where, well, Target and Best Buy, you always get inundated with hundreds of resumes.
Yeah.
But other companies that are Fortune 500, not as well known by the public, yeah, we struggled actually to get resumes. But uh,
So
that
it's
I think
an
is,
exciting time and something, yeah, resonated as well.
it's also comes down to, when you're building the team, putting the philosophy in there. There's that concept of, yeah, I know everyone needs a paycheck, we all do,
Mhm.
but what I tried to express in the postings was, you're building something exciting. Because I said, look, I don't want that person who wants to work at a large corporation, looks for like who's their change manager, who's their scrum master, and
Mhm.
what's the meeting cadence for the week. You're not getting any of that. I want
Yeah.
that person that, they want to go out and do something epic. They want to build something. They want to learn something, do different things. And it's, building a team is a lot like building a product. It goes through its stage, and that's the stage we're in. I'm sure eventually someday we'll get to that point where we have change managers and scrum managers all over the place, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's part of the exciting thing about joining smaller companies as well, is that you get to wear multiple hats and you get to try and learn and grow in different areas that you might not even know walking in, right? And you actually grow personally, I think, and professionally a lot faster and have broader skill set emerging from that experience as well. Great. So I'm mindful of your time. I know this was such a wonderful, wonderful chat. As you mentioned, you've already received 200 applications, but I know you're actively hiring. So for anyone who's watching this or will be interested, what's the best way for them to learn Olo's career page, or can they reach out to you on LinkedIn?
They can reach out. I mean, if they're interested in applying, they really just need to apply direct.
Mhm.
'Cause even though I am the accountable hiring manager, it really is a team process. And we'll have new roles coming out here in a few weeks, particularly data scientists, and maybe some digital analytics or decision science roles coming out. Just got to craft those job descriptions, but focusing on data science is the next one. But that's the thing. We're really building out a real team around true disciplines of discovery and analytics. So it's, there are things that are going to be in there that I don't think you typically find it in most analytics teams. You will see behavioral science in our right now. Actually, Olo does have some. So I right now I don't actually need to hire in that discipline, but things like decision science, which is much more of that economic types of analytics. Yeah, that's coming down, but I got to build the stack and environments for them to work in first.
Wonderful. Yeah. So basically, watch this page and obviously reach out to Edward directly if you are curious to learn more. Well, thank you very much, Edward. I really appreciate this conversation. And yeah, I'm going to stop recording now.